All right, welcome guys. Today is the very first episode, I guess we can call it that, of our PvP talk. And I guess we can call it that, PvP talk. This is gonna be a weekly thing. Each week we're gonna be talking about two classes and just have a focused conversation about that class and how it performs in PvP. Today I'm joined here with Lin-o. Most of you guys, if you are involved in the PvP community here, you guys definitely know who he is. Master level player on the RU servers, author of the very first PvP guide videos when it comes to the mechanics of PvP. Just really good stuff. If you guys checked out my video that I did, which was a very short beginner's guide of PvP, all of that information, first of all, I learned all of that stuff from Lin's guides, and I used a lot of his footage in that video too, and of course credited him in that video. Lin, would you mind introducing yourself?
That's right. So I'm just gonna say, right, I did pretty much there the introduction. So I play on the Russian server. I've been playing on the Russian server for a bit. I intend to main Sorceress. That's the character that I'm most interested in, and it's the character that I've been playing on Korea for a little bit now. Unfortunately, ranked is closed in Korea, so there isn't much of a way of doing ranked. But I've definitely been no-lifing a little bit of sorc in Korea, and I'd love to talk about her.
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. So in today's episode, we're going to be going over two classes. We're going to be going over Sorceress first, and then we're going to be going over Blaster, aka our Artillerist for the NAEU regions. And again, this is going to be a focused conversation on each specific class, and we're just going to kind of go over opinions. We're going to go over objective, subjective opinions, information, all that good stuff, right? And this is to give you guys, with the launch coming up, this is to give you guys a little better insight with some of these classes, and just get a feel for, like, not only the objective information but also just the opinions of multiple people. Lin and I, there are things that we see eye to eye on, and there are definitely things that we don't see eye to eye on. I think it's really important for you guys to not only hear my opinions, but also other people like Lin as well when it comes to some of these classes. So the first class we're going to be talking about here today is the Sorceress class. I feel like it's pretty fitting to talk about the Sorceress class first, because it is the newest quote-unquote class to be released NA East, NA/EU. And it's replacing the Summoner class, so it feels bad for the Summoner mains out there. But Sorceress is coming out, and this is a class that just there's just not a lot of information on this class out there. So if you're someone that is looking to PvP on sorc, hopefully we can give you some information here to really give you a good idea, at least with the general vibes of this class. Okay, so as far as sorc goes, it is considered to be a ranged caster DPS class. And what I mean by caster is not like, I should actually remove that word caster, because I meant that as in just like a magic caster, you know, you cast like, because it could be insta cast too, right? But just let me rephrase that, a ranged magic DPS class. That's what sorc is. I'd like to talk to Lin here about the general information on the class. So can you, Lin, can you kind of give me some info, not so much the thoughts yet, because we'll get into the opinions, but can you give me some objective information on the actual sorc class when it comes to the role, the pros and cons, and stuff like that?
Yeah, no, sounds good. So kind of like general playstyle, I suppose, when it comes to sorcerers. So, you know, as I say, she's like a ranged DPS, but she has less of a focus, I would say, on the DPS part as compared to a character like Demonic or Summoner, for example. And she's very much a very strong enabler, right? Because she's a pure range character. Bar her hard CC, which is kind of mid-range, but still pretty big, and some of her self-build tools, all of Sorceress's abilities are pretty much full ranged. You can do them from pretty much across the entire screen. So that's great because you can support your team and you can do damage without ever having to put yourself at risk. The way that she plays is you tend to use your lightning vortex skills and your cold core, which in your character there would be your Q and your F skills to get catches, and then you can convert off of that into big damage, either with elemental reactor, which is your A skill, or God's Wrath, which is your R skill. So you catch an enemy with one of these skills, then you pop your damage and you blow them up. And because she is so ranged, that means that whenever one of your teammates gets a catch, Sorceress can convert off of that as well with very big damage without ever having to risk herself. So that's kind of where she plays. She's a very backline character. She helps support her team both with peeling and catching from a long distance, and she is a very low-risk character with a sizable amount of reward as well. She is highly position dependent, so she thrives when you're abusing FOV. For people that don't know, the field of view in Arena is a little bit skewed, so the way that one person sees the camera is different from the way that the enemy team sees the camera, and she thrives in exploiting that to get catches when people aren't expecting. You're going to be using your hard stiffnesses, your hard CCs, and your knockdowns to just kind of save your team and get catches while always being aware of your position, your enemy's position, and your team's position, and being able to play around that. She's a very strategic based class.
Okay, so I think that's a great breakdown of the class. I just had to adjust real quick. The traits weren't set up. Right now, just so you guys know, I have this skill set and build right now that you see on my bar is what's considered to be the meta PvP build. And we will go over this specifically, but as we talk about some of these abilities, I will kind of demonstrate each skill, and hopefully, Lin, as you just did, if you could mention the skills as like Q, W, E, R, A, F, because I mean, we don't have the names anyway, and they're going to be different. So let's just go based off of what's on my bar here, and just so that people get a visual. So with that said, again, awesome breakdown of the class. I couldn't agree more. Could we maybe break it down a little bit more specifically, and let's talk about just the actual role of the class, okay? Like if you were gonna say, I mean, I know you already answered this, but if we were gonna say this in like 1 or 2 or 3 sentences, what would you say is the role of this class? For example, if we're talking about Bard, there's a lot of things you could say, but hey, as a Bard, your job is to support, backline, you know, you can kind of peel there, but you're providing shield, very, very important shields and damage reduction for your team. Bam. What would you say for Sorceress?
She is a ranged playmaker with great enabling potential. She can get catches from a neutral position to enable the team to get combos, while at the same time having very safe ways of peeling for her team.
Right, and it's interesting because a lot of people that are new to this game would probably think, is Sorceress a casting class? I know I kind of misused that term earlier, but what would you say to that? Because a lot of these skills are actually, I mean, minus the skill animation, it's pretty much an insta-cast class, would you say?
That is correct. In fact, Lost Ark is a little bit of a weird thing where certain skills, you know, have smart casting, other skills don't. You notice that every single one of her range skills is like smart casted, and she has no cast times whatsoever. In fact, her identity, her like first identity, her Z, increases the speed of all casting skills. But if you activate that with this build, it will not increase the speed of any of your skills because none of them are considered casting. They're all considered instant with this build specifically. So she isn't actually a caster. She's a caster in the archetype and the aesthetics, that's for sure. But she's really is kind of a user skill, instant use skills, and you just convert off of those then and there.
Right. So let's talk about the pros specifically. Excuse me. Let's talk about the pros specifically with this class. List me out some pros that you would say first for Sorceress. Things that stand out.
Yeah, sure. So I think her biggest pro, and probably the thing, why would you run a Sorceress? And that's she can add value to a team without ever having to commit. Because aside from some very specific self-build skills like reverse gravity, which is your S, and tsunami, which is kind of your W if you're running the slow pod, she really does everything from range. She's one of the classes that you can kind of play exclusively within the fire if you have to, right? Because people have to go in on you. You never have to go in. So she's always very safe when she's adding value. Her damage is safe. Her catches are safe. She can play a backline role for pretty much the entirety of the game. And that's what you want to be doing as Sorceress. And that enables your team to kind of go in without you ever taking that much damage. Another benefit that Sorceress has, another pro, is that she has very low cooldowns. So most of her skills cap out at 24 seconds cooldown. If you check every single one of your skills, the only one that would have more than 24 seconds cooldown would be God's Wrath, which is your R. That's what you usually run. However, Sorceress can be a little bit flexible because you notice that most of her skills don't actually knock down. Most of your catches is going to be you use Lightning Vortex, which is your Q, or Cold Core, which is your F, and then you pop damage. Because Subdue only applies during the time that somebody's in hard CC or knockdown, you don't actually get Subdue bonus from these things. So you can also run Crit with Sorceress, and that's very useful. Subdue is mostly if you're getting damage off of Reverse Gravity or Inferno and they have no roll, or you're getting combo off of your team. That's usually when you're going to be benefiting from Subdue. So both Critical and Subdue can work very well. Subdue would be Domination in NAU for the people who want to know the name. And Specialty or Specialization can also be viable if you want a more defensive playstyle, because it gives you more gauge generation, so that lets you dash more often, which is your X. And that's very, very important for PvP, because you're going to use that a lot.
Right, okay. So we will get into the build and the playstyle here towards the end. Let's talk about the cons then. Let's talk about some of the cons specifically with this class. What are some of the challenges you're going to be facing if you're planning on playing Sorceress for PvP?
So Sorceress is a very codependent class. She is atrocious at 1v1. She is probably one of the easiest classes to engage on, surprisingly. If you look at the 1v1 tournament Korean points tier list that they created, the only classes that would be ranked as weaker than Sorc in a 1v1 scenario would be Bard and Holy Knight, the supports. And that's with her 1v1 build. If you're taking her 3v3 build, which has no knockdown super armors, it becomes even harder to perform with. So she's very, very easy to rush down on, and she's very dependent on her team for PO. While she does have mobility, and that can make her safe, she's incredibly dependent on positioning. So it's great to know if you can dash away and avoid the enemy, but if you've just dashed away from your team, and now the enemy team has cut you off, you're in a position where you now have no gauge, and the enemy team can just rush you down, and you're not going to have the survival skills to stay alive. So that's kind of her weakness. Her main weakness is that she crumbles when it comes to high pressure, and she needs her team to be able to work around her, both to get damage and to survive.
Right. I think I totally agree with everything you just said there. If there's one thing that I would add to that, it would also be that the performance, like skill level aside, well, I guess this is directly correlated with skill, but the less you're landing attacks and missing it, the more you're missing attacks, the less you're landing attacks with Sorc, you just can't perform as well, right? Because a lot of your mobility comes from this X skill or your identity skill, and you don't have that available to you. You only have your spacebar dash if you're not landing your skills, because your skills, landing your skills is what's going to give you meter, this bar right here. If you're not landing those skills and you're missing everything, you're not going to generate that meter, and that's going to obviously reduce your ability to survive, because that's, like Lin was saying, you actually have, you don't really have super armors with this class. You have a couple of good defensive skills that you could use, like, you know, like this S skill, but none of this is actually level 2 protected. And if you don't have your spacebar available, especially if you've burned your roll, you're obviously not super tanky as well, being a mage class. So that's also something that I personally would like to add, because again, I mean, it kind of goes without saying, because like if you're skillful, then you should be able to land your attacks, but like you never know. Now granted, it is kind of insta cast, so it would be kind of hard to miss that all day, but
that's the thing. Yeah, so it depends, right? So Cold Core is one that's very easy to land. So your F skill, that one's almost instant and it's very difficult to react. They did nerf that, so the first hit that doesn't actually inflict any hit stun in PvP, but the second one does. So that one's very hard to react to. One of the biggest punish points actually that you have on Sorceress is your Q skill, because you lift your arm up before you actually get the orb out, and during that time other classes can react, right? So a demonic can space and dash into you, and because that skill is not immune to hard stiffness and hard staggers, that can be a punish point, right? So that's one of the things that you have to play around. A good Sorceress is one that is trying to get skills out of the FOV as much as possible, because that reduces the amount of punish points that you have with people just reacting to your skills, right? If you do Inferno, which is your E, that also has a cast animation. So this is something that's going to happen more so towards a higher level of play as opposed to a lower level of play. It's when people know what skills you're going to be using, and then they can react to that and they can engage. But you know, it's both a pro and a con when it comes to the gauge generation, because you can dash multiple times without cooldown. So in PvE it's only 30% of your gauge there, but in PvP is around 45% of your gauge. So you can only dash twice with your max gauge. But that does mean that there is no cooldown on that. You can dash once, then you can cast a skill and you can dash twice. On the other hand, it does mean that, as you said, you do have to land your skills. And if you're playing in a high-level game where people are peeling very well or going on you or putting in the right amount of pressure, it can be difficult to always have a full gauge. And playing around that gauge, it really is the end game for Sorceress, because staying alive is what's the most difficult thing to do with her. And so if you can manage your gauge, you can play her well.
Right, one thing I do want to mention, this is more of a mechanical note, as far as this teleport goes, this teleport does give you protection to CCs, and it's got a pretty long range, and the blink distance actually depends on where you put your cursor, so it's not always the same as most blink skills are in most MMOs. If my cursor is just here and I hit X, I'm only going to blink to there. So for PvE and specific positioning, precision, actually for PvP as well, for very precision based positioning as far as using the blink goes, it's a very good tool to have, because again, you're not going to be blinking the same distance, makes it a little bit more difficult to predict. With that said, I think going over the pros, cons, roles, playstyle, I think we've pretty much covered everything. The last thing I do want to go over as far as objective quote unquote information goes is the performance of the class, and as far as how this class is performing right now. We're gonna have our opinions on this, as this is gonna kind of lead into that. I just wanted to kind of go over the current performance of the class, like how is it performing, and trying to be as non-biased and non-opinionated as possible, which again, I know this will be might be a little difficult to do, but what do the numbers represent right now?
So I can actually bring up some of the stats. So when it comes to Sorceress performance in Korea, she does okay. You may not actually see her in the ranked boards all that often, but that's also because she hasn't had that much time to get into the ranked boards, right? Because she came relatively late. I think she only had about, what, 3 months or so to make it to the end of the season. I think, like 3 or 4 months or something. So
might be less, actually. Yeah, about that. About
3 months, 3 months. Yeah, so I think the season was, in Korea, was quite long, this one. I think it was, well, over 8 months long, right? So she had pretty much like less than half of the time of the season to actually make it to the leaderboard. So, you know, as a disclaimer, this will skew some of the values. When it comes to her presence in the top 200, so everywhere that you can see, you know, from the beginning to the end, there are about 6 sorceresses, I believe, in the like the top 200 for Korea. This isn't a particularly high number, so if you compare it to like a class like Summoner, for example, which has 12, or you know, Lance Master, which has 20. So she doesn't see too much of a high-level representation as the most played class for a specific player, but she does have quite a lot of positions in high rank. So of these 6, 3 of them, or rather, 1 of them is in Grandmaster, then you have another, I think, 3 in Master rank. So she actually has quite a good performance when it comes to being placed in high ranks, right? So you're not going to be able to see, there aren't any sharpshooters in Grandmaster, for example, but you do have OpenGL Sorcerers in Grandmaster. You have, you know, 2 Sorcerers in high Master rank, and then, you know, you only have about a few, like 1 or 2 bosses in a very high Master rank position, right? So she does perform very well. I would say that if you're looking to stats and you're looking to numbers, Korea may be a little bit skewed because she hasn't had the time to really show herself, and that's also why there's so little information out on her. But I do think that she's a very strong class with a lot of potential, especially at higher levels of play.
Right, yeah, and one thing that I would like to add on to that as well is within that short period of time, believe it or not, Sorceress went under quite a few balance changes as well. When it actually
did, yes.
When it first came out, I played a lot against Sorceress, but that was a little bit more when I was newer to the class. I'm sure Lin will kind of give his opinions on that, but it was considered amongst a lot of Koreans to be a weaker class. And one of the biggest issues with the Sorceress was that their spacebar dash, the range on that was very short, and the generating meter was a little bit slower, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it was just a little bit difficult for them to move around. And it just wasn't really in a good place in the beginning. Now towards the middle, they buffed it and they made the spacebar dash range. They increased the distance on that, and I think, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think they increased the meter generation too.
So that's not what they did. The issue that she had, and the reason why she was considered very weak at the beginning, is because her meter worked like Reaper's, in which case it would reset when she died. So her meter generation has remained unchanged, but if you died, you would respawn with no meter. And
Right,
that,
right.
because she doesn't have that many self-healing tools, it meant that you could literally just farm a sorceress out of spawn. If you kill the sorceress once, you would know that she would respawn
Right.
without any meter, so you could
Right.
just sit on her and just keep looping kills over and over and over and over, especially in a higher level game where people can focus you down.
Right.
And that's why she was weak, because she couldn't survive if you died. Once you died, that was it. The game
Yeah,
was
that
over.
that was the thing. There was something with the meter. I couldn't remember. But yeah, so they buffed it, and then again, personally, I didn't play Sorc back then, but like if I were gonna throw in an opinion, I know I'm trying to be as objective as possible. As far as the objective information goes, it came out and it was at a certain state, which wasn't super favorable amongst a lot of the top Korean players. And then they buffed it, and it became, according to Typhoon and these guys, it became a hard carry class. And a lot of these guys were actually putting it as high as an S tier class, A to S. And then again, and remember, this is within a span of like 3 months or however long it's been out, it got nerfed again, and then the performance came down. I don't know, maybe Lin, you could tell us how they got nerfed. I don't actually know what the nerf was, but they got nerfed, and they were considered to be a non-S tier. It was undoubtedly, they are not an S tier class anymore, but they're still pretty good, so people were kind of putting them in that A range. Could you kind of
And I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Yeah, that's that. Like that. What you summarized my opinion with that statement. To talk a little bit about the nerf and what made Sorceress so overwhelming at the beginning is that F skill, that cold call. So if you press that skill, what that skill does, and if you use it, it creates that little AoE that does a lot of damage. The damage comes out almost as soon as you press that skill. So people who have played the game before may be familiar with Arcana, for example, and her skill Unlimited Shuffle, and that's probably one of her strongest skills. And what it is it's a hard stiffness, or a hard stagger. So that means that even if your basic attack here, you're in a skill animation, you are going to get hits done through that. So she could use that in neutral to catch people instantly, and she isn't at risk, because as soon as you get the skill out, you can move, right? You don't have to stay in one place. So it's a very safe skill that essentially let you catch people, let your team convert off of it, and it was pretty much completely and utterly unreactable. For a skill that's only on a 24-second cooldown, so with 1000 agility, that gets brought down to pretty much 19, 18.
19.
Yeah, so it was such a strong skill. That alone meant that if sorcerers had that off cooldown, you were going to get caught, and there was nothing that you could do about it. You had to essentially read and just completely and utterly predict when she was going to be using that. What they did now is that the first hit of that skill, not only does it not inflict a hard stagger or hard stiffness anymore, but it doesn't inflict any hits at all. So you can pretty much just kind of, I guess, walk through it, I guess. So it messes that up. It may also just be my ping messing it up, but I'm pretty sure that they at least removed the hard stiffness inflict on that skill, on that first hit. Yeah, so you can at the very least immune the first hit. Yeah.
Yeah. So they have a window of protection or counterplay in that window, yeah.
That's right. So it's still very fast. It's still very hard to react to. It's still like an amazing skill. That's why they haven't removed that from the meta build, right? People still run the skill because it's like such a strong skill to use.
But at the higher levels, that can be counterplayed.
Yeah, that split second may be the difference between you getting interrupt to them being able to move out of it in time, or them being able to punish you or something like that. So it's still like a very strong class, like definitely 80 minimum. I think she's very strong, but as you say, she's gone to like many different balance changes, and it's been a little bit volatile, which is why it's very difficult to tell her performance from the Korean rankings, because people may have tanked their qualifiers early on with sorcerers when they were trying to play her, and she was at the weak state, and then she was during that brief period of time when she was like super strong and everything was fixed and cold core was crazy, and then she gets lots of stuff off of that, and then she got nerfed again near the end, and then her performance seems to have evened out a little bit more.
With that, I'd like to kind of transition into the actual build of the class, because I know we've been talking about specific skills, just to kind of show you guys what we're dealing with as far as this build goes. In case you want to copy pasta build, this is linked in our Discord, by the way, as our builds for every single class. And this seems to be the current meta build. Of course, this is subject to change in NA if we get different versions, pending patches. But I feel like it's going to be pretty close to, I think it's going to be pretty similar to the version that we have right now. So, Lin, can you walk us through these skills individually? And we'll start with lightning vortex. Just so you know, we are going to just call them based off of the translated versions here. I can promise you these skill names will be different, so just memorize the icons.
Yeah, so lightning vortex, which is your Q skill there, that is your bread and butter skill. That's kind of what sorcerers are going to be using it most. It's a very low cooldown skill, and that's how you catch people. So it has a very big range, both as in how far away you can place it and how big the ball is. And it inflicts hard stiffness. So it's one of those skills that, you know, you can't just immune by basic attacking through it. It will interrupt you unless you're using a skill that has that first level of immunity. So what you do is you put that in just in the neutral game to try and get somebody with it, or you can peel for your team by placing that on top of an enemy. And as you see there, it just electroshocked the enemy. It just applied a hard CC. And that's because that first pod has a 10% per hit to actually apply a hard CC on the enemy. So even if you aren't going to be hard stiffing somebody because they have that tier 1 immunity, you can still maybe get lucky with the hard CC. And it is a very long CC, as you can see, 2 whole seconds. So off of that, you land that skill, and then you can just burst with your damage skills, which would be your A, your elemental reactor, and R, which would be God's Wrath, right? So you can just pop that there, and then that explodes, bam, big damage. And then you can just convert with your burst pretty much off of any catch. And even if you don't have your cooldowns ready and you don't have your burst, it doesn't matter because your team can see that they are in hit stun, can see that they, you know, are pretty much free targets, and then they can go in and burst off of that too. So that Q skill is probably the most important skill for sorcerers in PvP. Usually we run it at 7 because that increases the time in which they get hit stun for, so it's about 3 seconds that the orb stays there. There are like alternate builds where you can run a 3rd pod, and that gives you 2 uses of the skill. So instead of using it once, you can use it twice. But that does reduce the time in which something gets kept in hit stun for about 1 second, which is that one, yeah. So it'll have 2 charges, so you can use it once, and then you can use it twice. The cooldown remains the same too. But it does do less hits, it stays for a lower time, and you do have to sacrifice other pods, which would either be Winter Schooling, which is your F, for doing less damage, or you would sacrifice a pod on your S to be reverse gravity, so it doesn't get a knock up at the second hit. It would be just a knockdown, so that little explosion at the end would not happen. But that is your most important skill. Knowing how to use Lightning Vortex well, and playing around the cast time that the skill has, so you know, the animation rather, is crucial to playing Sorceress correctly.
Perfect. Let's move on to Tsunami, and we're just gonna actually go in this order. I think it'll be easier. Tsunami, yep. Which is the W skill. Tell us about
so
the Tsunami skill.
Tsunami is one of your main self-healing skills. So you can see this slow-moving wave that knocks people down. And it doesn't have any super armor, but it is, you know, a stagger immune skill. It's a hard stiff immune skill. So if somebody's trying to catch you, you can use this to prevent getting yourself hit stunned, knocking them down, and then being able to make yourself some space to run away. There are 3 versions of the skill that I would say that people run. So the 2nd level pod. So you can run the slow pod, which is what you're running now. This is what most sorceresses run. Because it's so slow, you can kind of walk with the wave. So it's perfectly to keeping melee classes around you, right? You can stay with the wave. If anybody tries going on you, they're going to get hit stunned by that wave. They're going to get knocked down. So you can almost use that as a barrier as you try and move away from the enemy. Funnily enough, you might not even be using this towards the enemy. You might be using that wave sideways so that you can walk with the wave, and then the melee is not going to go on you, right? Because then they have to go through that wave to get you. So that's a way of covering yourself to move. There is the middle pod for that, which inflicts a knockdown once you use it. So if you take that middle pod, on the 2nd row. So what it does is it makes it go faster, so you can't really a move of the wave, but it does have that secondary knock-up that occurs when the wave finishes its course. So if somebody does manage to avoid the wave the first time, they now have to avoid that 2nd hit of the wave. And that's great for setting up combos as well, because it keeps people hit stunned and in knockdown for longer than the wave does regularly because of that 2nd knockdown. So it's a very good way of having a little bit more range on the skill because it doesn't move so slowly. You can use it to peel for your team from a longer range, and you can use it to keep yourself safe by staying in that area when the 2nd knockup occurs.
One of the things, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
No, I was just gonna add, one of the things that Sorc actually has a lot of access to are these like long, prolonged animation skills that really increase. Like, I probably should have mentioned this earlier in the playstyle thing, but one of the things, like, yeah, sure, Sorc doesn't have that much super armor, but they have a lot of these skills. Like, for example, this S skill, this whole thing is going to be a level 2 knockup. So like, even though you're unprotected, if someone that, like, for example, a striker tries to engage on you, sure, they're going to knock you up, but they're also going to get CC'd as well, as well as everyone else in there. Of course, there's counter plays to that, but like this skill as well, all of that is just things that you could use to protect yourself. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so I would say, like, yeah, Sorceress doesn't have any armors herself, and the way that she protects herself is by, you know, moving with the skills, or you know, working around these long skills and these, you know, secondary knockups, etc., because that's the only way that she can stay alive. This does make her very susceptible to characters that have super armor on their engages,
right?
Because they don't care about that, and they can just outtrade you. But for characters that don't, she can definitely work around that very well. The final second tier pod on that tsunami skill is one that just makes it very fast. So the one on the left side, wide attack. So that makes the wave essentially go 30% further. That means that it becomes less so just a self-peel skill and more of a team peel skill. You can now use that to get knockdowns on the enemies from a very long distance. Usually you would use Inferno, which is your E, to get knockdowns from range, but that's kind of all you have. All the other knockdowns that you have are pretty, like, melee, right? It would be like a slow-moving tsunami, or it would be reverse gravity on your S. But with that long range, you can then start peeling for your team much easier, right? You can see that it's very slow, it doesn't really get there in time. So those are the 3 ways that you can use Tsunami. Now, there is something that's very important for me to flag, and it's a clip that I would like to show, where Tsunami can be a little bit of an inconsistent skill, because the way that the hitbox works is that it's literally a wave. So you can imagine it's like flipping tiles. So I'm sending a clip here, and I'm going to send a second clip. And if you just have a look at these, you will notice that people can sometimes actually walk through the Tsunami. Because unlike skills like Summoner's Horses, for example, where the hitbox just moves forwards, it's like active in one tile, and then it disappears, and then it's active on the tile in front, and then it disappears, and it's active in another tile in front.
You see,
so you'll be able to see that, you know, people can just literally dash through Tsunami, whether it's a slow-moving one or the fast-moving one, if they have a skill that moves them fast enough. Most people tend to take the slow-moving one also to stop that from happening, because it's harder to get that gap in Tsunami when using the slow one. That's also why it's part of the meta build and what's usually recommended. This happens far more frequently with the fast-moving one, but it does mean that people can kind of just like dash through them if they have a fast enough skill. It can be a little bit inconsistent, it can be risky to do so, but there are situations where you would have caught somebody, but then they just happen to be moving and then they catch you instead. And that's something that happens with pretty much all versions of Tsunami. So be careful when you're using the skill, is what I would say. It is good for self-healing, but it does have its downsides also.
Let's talk about Inferno.
Yeah, Inferno is an amazing skill. It's one of the things, like, just like Lightning Vortex, is part of your bread and butter. So what Inferno does is just a very long-range knockup, and the hitbox on it is like, it's very large. It's almost unfair. It does have a bit of an activation, but it's really quick. It doesn't do that much damage. It's only going to be doing around 6-8 damage in PvP, so it's not a skill that you're going to really be using for damage. It's a skill that you can use to peel and to get knockdowns. So if you notice that a member of the enemy team has no roll and they're trying to run away, you can use Inferno from range to get them to be knocked down again, and you now have them with no roll and your team can convert off of it. It's very difficult to avoid this skill if you don't have any mobility skills because of the large AoE and the fast cast. It's not a skill that you can just walk out of if you don't have any mobility skills. You do have the space to use some kind of mobility to avoid it, and it's not that high cooldown either, which means that it's very, very important for both healing for your team and making these opportunities for them to convert off of enemies. So what people tend to do is they pair that with the bread and butter sword combo. What I would say is you pop Lightning Vortex, which is your Q, and then you use A, which is your elemental reactor, and then as A explodes, you Inferno, right? And then you get that whole big damage combo coming in through. That's what a lot of sorcs tend to do, so it all gets masked across the damage numbers. Elemental Reactor does hit quite hard, around like 14k or so it can be masked, but it's about like 3 hits of 2k each, 3k each tops that you get with Inferno. So it's not really a skill that you use for damage, but it is a skill that you use to get knockdowns and to make opportunities for your team.
Okay. Anything else you want to add to that?
No, it's pretty straightforward. Use it to get range knockdowns. It's just a very big AoE.
And just to answer that question, Laffy, does the initial cast have staggered? No, it does not.
Yeah.
Like you're talking about when their fire is below, right? Yeah, it does not. No form of CC there. Okay, so let's talk about Divine Wrath. Let's talk about Divine Wrath.
Actually, just going on that quick point for Luffy, when the AoE, not just before but after, the pod leaves like a little burning zone that does damage. Unlike Summoner's Horses, which does do hit stun, that little burning zone at the end does not hit stun. You can just walk through it. It's just regular damage. So yeah, it's just a knockdown. That's all it is. And for Divine Wrath, now this is your big burst skill. It's very thin, but it's very long. It goes super, super far. So that's how Sorceress gets a lot of her damage out. Anytime somebody gets a catch, so if you use Lightning Vortex, you can just use, Divine Wrath, and then you can get a good damage convert off of that because they hit stun, bam, big damage. If you get a double knockdown from range, with Inferno, then you can use, God's Wrath again, Divine Wrath, and you get lots of damage that way. If your teammates get a knockdown or get somebody hit stun, you can do that. Anytime that somebody either has no roll and is on the ground, or you keep them hit stunned within Lightning Vortex, you can use that for damage. The best part about the skill, it's very straightforward. It's just a line that does damage. It does inflict hard stagger or hard stiff. It doesn't really knock down, but the damage is pretty good. It does around 20k on average in PvP against regular armor targets, and it's just very long. So you can do damage without having to put yourself at risk. It is the highest cooldown at 30 seconds base, which is around 24 seconds in PvP with 1000 agility. But it's just it's just great damage. So whenever you feel that you have an opportunity to do that, do land it. One thing that is important to keep in mind is that there are certain combos that you may screw up if you're not aiming it properly. So what you might do is you might do Lightning Vortex and then Elemental Reactor, so Q into A, and then you would finish off with your R as well. That's probably the highest damaging combo that Sorceress has. But one thing that you have to keep in mind is that Elemental Reactor does knock people left and right depending on where you place it. And because the hitbox for God's Wrath can be a little bit thin, especially against player hitboxes, if you try and aim it towards them, they may just be knocked out of range of your skill like that. So always keep in mind the thin but long hitbox and play around your knockdowns when you're aiming it. Yeah.
Perfect. And and the tripods we're running here is wide attack for that attack range increase, inevitable fate, which is the 3 little ball looking like things. There with horsepower amplification. Again, guys, these are going to be different names. Just remember the icons because the icons are not changing. If we were to show you here, it is 311, and for Inferno, we were running 213. If we didn't mention that. Okay, so we've been talking about elemental reactor, reaction, whatever it is, react quite a bit here. Let's talk a little bit about elemental react.
Yeah, so it's a pretty straightforward skill. She puts down a crystal, it charges up a little bit, and then explodes. This is probably where most of your damage is actually going to be coming from in PvP, because it's very non-committal to Sorceress. You can set up the crystal and you can kind of walk away. It's also very good for self-peel. You can put that on yourself, and because the explosion is delayed, if somebody's trying to go on you, they're going to have to deal with that exploding. The cooldown is kind of long, 24 seconds, but because you can get that off of any Lightning Vortex, it's pretty simple damage tool, and it really is kind of straightforward, right? You just put it where people get hit stunned, where people are, and then it does a big explosion and they get knocked down and they take damage. I'd say you get more damage out of Elemental React than you do out of Divine Wrath, just because it's a lot easier to get it off. Because you don't have to commit to that very long casting animation.
Right.
You can just pop that in, walk away, and somebody gets hit.
Right.
And the range is pretty good too. There are 2 pods. There's a cooldown decrease pod that we're taking. There's also a range increase pod that can make it go a little bit further, but the cooldown decrease is recommended because you can see 5 full seconds get shaved off of that, which means that almost as your Lightning Vortex is off cooldown, you can kind of do an Elemental Reactor with pretty much the Lightning Vortexes that you have. You have to wait like 2-3 seconds or so, but you can always get some damage off when you catch somebody, which is very, very handy.
We got with the 1000, so just so you guys know, we are spec'd into the PvP stats, so the numbers that you're seeing right now is going to be identical to what you have in actual PvP. Again, we're running 1000 agility, 249 subdue, an agility stat or swiftness, I think. Is it called swiftness in NA?
Swiftness, yeah, that's right.
Is going to also reduce your cooldowns, and as you can see, the cooldown starts at 15 seconds with this.
Yeah. So that's why we take that cooldown pod. So you can pretty much just do, you know, lightning vortex, elemental reactor, and then as lightning vortexes come off cooldown, you have to, you walk around a bit, you try and get an opportunity to get it again, and by the time you get it again, elemental reactor should be off of cooldown, and then you can do it. That's like her main damage tool, essentially.
Yeah, and another thing that I want to mention about this, as honestly, as well as lightning vortex, is like you have a couple of oh shit buttons with sorc, right? Like if you run out of mobility, outside of your two main peel skills, which is reverse gravity and tsunami, it's like if you know you're gonna get caught, you can also just place one of these bad boys down.
Yep.
To try and counter knock up, to try and force a spacebar dash, to whatever that may be. Because again, one of the things that sorc have are these long lasting animations, right, from skills that you cast, and they just kind of linger there for a while, harassing whatever situation. Anything else you want to add to elemental react? The tripods we are running for this skill with this build currently is 3-1-1, as you can see here. Anything else?
Not much to it. It's just it's a pretty straightforward skill. Like I said, the only thing that I'd say is one of the main damage combos that you do would be lightning vortex, which is Q, into elemental reactor, which is A, into divine wrath, which is your R. And just make sure that when you're placing the elemental reactor, place it in such a way that it's going to knock your enemies into your lightning, not out of it. So like place it directly behind them, or if you don't think that you can place it behind them because they're too far away, you can place it slightly to the side and then aim your divine wrath to the side as well to go where they're going to be knocked out to. So it's just keep in mind that it's a knockback and that you have to play around that is all I would say.
Great. All right, let's talk about reverse gravity here.
Reverse gravity, the star healing skill for sorc. It's a very good skill. So it has tier 1 super armor, so it prevents against, you know, hard stiffs or hard staggers. It's very big range, and it has Q knockdown. So when you activate the skill, as the field appears, you start lifting people up, and that, you know, is a knockdown, and then it explodes, and that's a second knockup. So when somebody's trying to engage the sorceress, if they have space, it's not that big of a deal because they can, you know, just space the second hit. But if they don't, even if they manage to get that first knockdown, they have to deal with that second knockdown, which means they can't stay in. So it makes it difficult to engage on sorceress if you don't have space, or if you don't have a very quick mobility skill to get you out of there before that second hit occurs. Of course, sorceress does not have any tier 2 super armor here. She is not immune to knockdowns. So a class like Berserker can just kind of go in and execution you while you're in there. It does suffer when you're dealing with classes that either have engages that let them catch you from outside the range of reverse gravity, like a demonic demon ray, for example, or demonic spikes, and also classes that have super armor types of knockdown. But other than that, is probably her best dealing skill because it's very difficult to work around this, and it's pretty low cooldown too. You know, only 16 seconds base, so it gets taken to like what, 14, 13 with 1000 agility, yeah, 13 seconds there. So it's usually off cooldown when you need it, and it's great at buying yourself just a little bit more time for your team to come support you, or for you to be able to get away. Also, one thing that I actually add to it really quickly before we move to the next one is there is a combo that you can do. If you use S and then you use R, which is your divine wrath, it's pretty much a guarantee to land. Because usually, one thing that you also have to keep in mind is when you get lifted by the skill, when the enemy gets lifted by the skill, they are lifted to the highest level. So different skills in Lost Ark have kind of different tiers in which they knock people up. So if your teammates are trying to hit somebody, don't use reverse gravity because that's going to take them kind of out of range for most skills. But sorceress skills, most of them actually land when they're very high up in the air, namely divine wrath, right? And, you know, like inferno, all these different skills. So while your team can't really combo too much off of reverse gravity, you can, and so you can get a lot of damage out. So you can do little combos like you do reverse gravity, and then you put elemental reactor where they're going to fall, and then you start casting divine wrath. So you get knocked down once, knocked down twice, knocked down thrice, and then you hit them with the divine punishment, divine wrath, and that does a lot of damage. So it's a very good tool to actually get damage out if the enemies happen to get caught by it. You can convert that into a lot of damage if you're wise about it. Yeah, so it's both a good self-heal skill and a good combo tool if they are in melee. Just be wary of not messing up your team's combos with this skill, because it can happen.
Yeah, so just to kind of reiterate that point, as you see this character fly in the air, and I'm sure you guys have probably noticed this, maybe even with like a blade knockup, one of the key protected knockups that a blade has, there are certain moments where the character reaches too high. They get too high. They get floated too high, sorry, and any other like short range melee or whatever attack actually won't hit them. And I'm sure if any of you guys have played Blade, that would probably be the easiest, most common thing that happens when you try to combo Blade. Sometimes that second attack that you use after you use that little mini tornado skill that knocks them up, sometimes it just misses, and that's precisely why. Even a Holy Knight, actually, that happens to. Even happens to a Holy Knight sometimes as well. So that is what Lin is referring to. That so sometimes as they're in the air during that frame when they're up there, some attacks just won't land. We are running the where are you? We are running the 2-1 pods here. Wide attack lava field 2-1. And let's move on to windblast. This is a very, very key hard CC skill here. Can you talk us through this one, Lin?
Yeah, so it's actually pretty straightforward. You know, you just fire off this like windblast, quite literally, and it just hard CCs enemies. The most crucial thing to know about this skill is that first it pushes enemies back. So be careful when you're using it. So say you do a lightning vortex with like a Q, and then you are going to hard CC them. Be careful so that you don't push them out of your skill, because that skill does have a little push associated with it. But other than that, is a very, very, very long hard CC there, as you can see, and it keeps people hit stun for a very long time. So you can, well, just do a lot of damage off of it. It's usually reserved for either self-heal to stop people from going on you, or to save your teammates, right? So say that your teammate gets caught by an artillerist and you have to stop him from comboing. You're going to be using that because it has a pretty good range. It doesn't go as far as some of the other range CCs in the game, like Demonic's Demon Ray or Summoner's, Electroshock Orb. It has a more mid-range approach to it, but it still goes pretty far, and it's quite fast too. So it's a very useful tool when it comes to just speeding for your team and saving yourself in clutch situations. There isn't that much more to say about it. Most of your combos, you're not going to be needing to land people with Windblast to do damage off of it, because most of your damage comes off of your Lightning Vortex, right? Or catching people with Lightning Vortex, or just getting a double knockdown. Although you can use that off of a knockdown, so you can land Tsunami if they're in melee, and then you can use Windblast to hard CC them, and now they can't roll because they're hard CC'd, and then you can burst them with Divine Wrath, for example. So you do have combos that you can do that way off of your knockups, like Inferno or Tsunami, just to kind of prevent them from being able to roll. But usually you would want to reserve this either for saving yourself or saving your team, because it is the only hard CC that you have, and it is pretty fast. One thing that I was going to say, this is more of an alternate build option, is that this may be a flex skill, so some choose to run Frozen Fog instead, because I think it's called Needle Ice there in your translation.
Needle.
So no, it would be probably a different skill even. Some people choose to drop the skill entirely.
Needle Ice,
this
right?
Needle Ice skill, yeah, with I believe it would be 3, 2, 1. Sorry, 3, 3. Sorry, 3, 3, 1. Yeah, or 1, 3, 1. Either one works. But if you just save that and use that skill really quickly, so if you just do that, right? So that's another one that people tend to use. So it's also another hard CC. As you can see, people only get hard CC'd on the second part of it though, as opposed to the first. It also has pretty good range, not as much as Windblast, but it does have tier 2 super armor. This and another skill called Ice Arrows are usually the only tier 2 super armors that Sorceress has, and this is probably one of the ones that they may opt to run because it's still a hard CC and it still freezes, but it is delayed. So this is not usually used as part of a meta build. You may be running this if you feel that you're fighting too many melees and too many rushdown classes and you need that tier 2 super armor.
Or high
usually
ping.
You would be running Windblast instead. Oh, high ping, yes.
High ping, this would be a great option for high ping.
Yeah, so I myself, I do not run Windblast in Korea. I would definitely be running that in Russia and in EU when I'm playing at low ping. But it's very difficult to land Windblast at a high ping because the hitbox is quite thin, even if it's quite long. and that can be a little bit difficult to land.
It can be kind of deceiving because when you look at it, it looks super wide. Like visually, you would think it has a massive hitbox, like width-wise, but it actually kind of doesn't. It's actually really easy to miss this. Like that's about as far off as you can go here. Like if my mouse is here, it's going to miss.
Yeah, also it's a little bit of a Kono hitbox. So the closer you are, it feels like the smaller it is. So it's bigger if you get it like at the very end. But if you're using it close to your enemies and they're really near you, you can see that you're not going to be landing that, right? So if anybody, like you're going against a gunslinger or a devil hunter, you know, or I got to call Deadeye in AEU, and they're using kind of like gun dance, so they're trying to, you know, deathfire, trying to catch you, you know, dancing around you. That's something that's going to be really hard to land if you're at high ping. So it's better to just use, you know, Needle Ice or aka Frozen Fog and just like get that big AoE, get that freeze. But do keep in mind that Windblast does hard CC immediately, whereas Needle Ice does not. So that's something that you have to keep in mind. It does have KG Super Armor though on Needle Ice. You do not have any armor whatsoever in Windblast, right? You can get interrupted out of that very easily. So don't try and trade with this. You do this preemptively when people are jumping on you or to peel from range, but don't risk it.
All right, so as far as Windblast goes, if you are choosing to run the meta build, we are running 3-3-2 here. And as you know, Needle Ice, we are going 3-3-1 with the option of going 1-3-1, right?
Yeah, so what happens is that one, it's pretty much a both an attack speed and a movement speed decrease, which is incredibly useful in PvP.
Very useful.
Movement speed is okay, but attack speed is huge. It makes it very difficult for some classes to get their combos out. So that would apply in the first hit. That's something that you can do. On the other hand, you do make the skill slower, so it takes a little bit longer for you to get the skill out and for the hard CC to apply. You can see that it's not gapless, even with the attack speed up. People can still kind of walk through, or, you know, use a super armor, or, you know, a all immunity rather, between the first hit and the second hit to kind of try and get away from that hard CC. Like they can space through, or they can dash away. So usually having a higher attack speed can be useful. On the other hand, do keep in mind the higher attack speed means that you have the super armor state for less time. So you don't have the super armor last as long if you're casting the skill faster. So it's up to you whether you want to go for the attack speed and movement speed debuff and have a longer super armor, but have people have an easier time being able to immune and dodge out of your skill, versus just having a faster attack speed and being able to get that hard CC out faster, but then not having that debuff and that longer super armor.
Right. That's a good point. So let's move on and talk about Winter's Calling, the last skill here. Again, another skill that we've been talking about in great detail, class that's been going, that has been nerfed over past couple months, I guess. Something class has only been out for a few, but let's go over Winter's Calling here.
So this is the problem skill for Sorc, the one that did get nerfed. So it's pretty straightforward. If anybody's familiar with ARK, think of it as like a mini shuffle, but non-committal. You don't have to stay locked in animation. You press the button, an AoE comes out, it hits those enemies, and then it blows up. The skill actually does pretty good damage. Each one of the starting hits, as you can see, does, you know, about like 2k in PvP, and then the final hit usually tends to average out around like 7 to 8k. So you can actually do, you know, about like 12, 13k just with the skill alone. One thing to keep in mind is this is an incredibly good catching skill. You use that in the same way that you use Lightning Vortex. You get that to hard stiff enemies or hard stagger, because the skill does inflict hard stagger, and then you can just get your damage off of that while they're being hit stunned. There are a few things to call out about the skill though, which is important. The first hit does not hard stagger. That's the nerf that they did to the skill. So if you use that, it does have to get to the second hit for you to be able to catch the enemy. And there is a gap between the third hit and the fourth, which is that little explosion. This means that the skill is not gapless. If they have a mobility skill, or they have any skill for that matter that has, you know, tier 1 super armor, or they have their spacebar, they can kind of get away from the skill between the third and the fourth hit. This means that if you try to Elemental Reactor, or if you try to Divine Wrath, you are not going to connect that off of Winter's Calling. You need to either use Lightning Vortex to keep them in there, or you need to use Windblast to keep them hard CC'd so that they can't get out, or you need to use Inferno to just keep them, knock them up in the air so that when they fall, they get hit by the final hit. But you can't really do much off of Inferno, right? They fall, they get hit by the final hit, and then that's kind of it. If they have roll, they're just going to roll away. that's kind of the ways that you have to convert off of Winter Schooling. You are not going to be using Winter Schooling if you don't have another skill to keep them inside. You kind of want to reserve this when you have something that can maintain the enemies within that third and fourth hit. So yeah, you can do that damage there. You can still use this for peeling because, like I said, it does inflict heart stiffness or heart stagger. So you can use that to interrupt enemies that are going for your team, even if you're not going to be getting kind of any catch out of it, and they may be able to run out. You can at the very least be used to interrupt enemy skills. And it can also just be used for damage because, like I said, it does around 12-13k if all the hits land, if you're running it at 3 pods, which is quite useful, right? Quite helpful. So you can use that for damage as well, though it is best reserved as a catching skill because it is faster than Lightning Vortex. And when you're fighting against Sorc at a high level of play, you are going to be punishing Lightning Vortex because Lightning Vortex has this, very obvious animation of her lifting her staff up. And because it is a big bread and butter skill, any class that has an engage that inflicts heart stiffness can just kind of open up on you as soon as you use Q, as soon as you use that skill. Whereas Winter Schooling the animation is a lot more subtle. She just places the staff on the ground. So it's much harder to react to, even with the single hit, not the first hit, not inflicting hard stiff. She can kind of move out of that skill and she's out of animation lock much faster. So it's harder to punish Winter Schooling as compared to Lightning Vortex. So you can use Winter Schooling as a catch and then confirm with Lightning Vortex essentially.
As far as the next section goes, Lin, I think we should talk about North America, EU, Europe expectation levels here. Now this is the part, guys, where we start talking about opinions and what our thoughts are on this class and how people are going to, whether it's how people are going to perform on them or how the class is going to perform in our region, whatever that may be. Everything up until now was as objective as we could possibly put it. Now comes in the opinions. Let's talk about the expectation level with North America and EU when it comes to PvP. Rated team deathmatch. We'll talk about that first. Rated team deathmatch. Solo queue, because we don't have pre-mades, and we will talk about pre-mades because we do have leagues coming out in the West. When it comes to the solo queue portion, what are your thoughts? Tell me your thoughts on Sorceress's performance.
So I think Sorceress is going to go, it's going to be a lot of curves, I feel. I think that she's going to do very well at a, beginner level of play, because mechanically she's not a hard class to play, right? Her combos are relatively simple. So long as you understand, how your elemental reactor and how your push is working from windblast, as long as you're not pushing people out of your own skills and you get to land your stuff, it's not that hard. You don't have very complex combos.
Right.
And she also has the advantage of being a ranged, and ranged is usually easier to pick up than melee classes because you don't have to fully understand everybody else's skills before you start playing, since you are usually not putting yourself in a position of risk. So because she's such a backline character, she's almost never at risk unless she gets rushed down. A lot of newer players tend to fall prey to the out of sight, out of mind fallacy, right? So they don't see Sorc, they think it's okay, and then they get hit by Lightning Vortex off screen, and then they get bursted, and they don't realize that, right? They're gonna think Sorc is overpowered. And right. That's what I think is going to happen at a lower level of play, where people don't fully understand the correct punish points. They're still learning how to play their classes as opposed to learning how to play the matchup. And I think Sorceress is really going to excel at lower ranked queues. Once you start going to more intermediate ranked queues, I think that's where she's going to suffer the most.
Right.
Because Sorceress isn't like a reaction-based class. If you want to play a class that's fast reaction, good combos, weaving in and out, punishing things, she's not that. She's a mage, and she lives. Even though she doesn't have casting skills, she is a mage through and through. And positioning is how you play this class. This is a very strategic class because you lack super armors. The way that you survive is via your mobility. But if you move yourself away from your team, now you're isolated, and now you can get run down. Once players in an intermediate level can start understanding, okay, Lightning Vortex animation, I can punish that. Inferno animation, I can punish that. I see that Sorceress is, gearing up for Divine Wrath, I can punish that. I know, once they start tracking cooldowns, etc., they start understanding, oh, alright, so Cold Core is up, so I have to be wary, I have to use a skill, or you have to be watching out for the specific animation. Once they start playing around the actual Sorceress matchup, I think you start struggling a lot, because I feel that Sorceress, especially at an intermediate level, is not as much of a carry as she is, especially after the Cold Core nerf, because she has a lower ability to make, to be that playmaker, right? To get that instant catch in neutral. She is great when she's ignored, but as soon as people change focus and they're like, okay, we're gonna rush down the sorc, that's when she's really struggling, especially against classes in a solo queue environment, which may have, you know, a variety of super armors or ways of engaging on her from a distance, and not caring about things like, oh, hey, reverse gravity doesn't matter because the Zerg just came in and sword stormed you. Like when sorcerer players are still, they understand them, when people understand the micro level of the game, but they don't understand the macro level of the game, they're just gonna think, oh, okay, I gotta use a dash, you gotta get out. You managed to escape, but now you're gonna get rushed down. And I think that's where she's gonna fall. And then the final bit is when we get to that high level of play, and that's where I think she evens out and where she deserves that kind of A tier rating. I'd say that she's probably like, she's almost a little bit like demonic or, you know, shadow hunter in that sense, where she has a decent amount of damage, she has great ways of converting neutral, of getting catches for her team, and she's a great team play class. She has very good synergy with a lot of different classes. And I think that's where she shines in solo queue. Because she's such a backline, so long as you have a melee that can see, okay, she gotta catch a lightning vortex, gotta catch a cold call. I can go in, I can like axle in, or, you know, get a headhunting. Or, you know, a Zerg can just shoulder charge in and then get a red dust. You know, there are all these different classes that can use these opportunities that Sorceress creates. And in a higher level of play, where you have different people watching out for each other and peeling for each other, and like moving together and working as a team, you're going to see Sorceress shine a lot more, because her main weakness, which is her inability to 1v1, her inability to survive by herself without mobility, is kind of offset by you now having a team that's going to be applying damage reduction buffs to you when it matters most, that's going to be peeling enemies off you, that's going to be watching for your spaces and for your cooldowns, that's going to be supporting in that regard. So while I don't think that she's going to be, you know, like Scouter level of play, where, you know, Scouter isn't going to exist in NAEU, I do feel that she can offer a lot of value to a team at a high level. And I think that we'll actually see quite a fair bit of Sorceresses at a high level of play in NAEU once people finally understand how to play her at that macro level of play.
Yeah, I think for me personally, with Sorceress, I really feel like it's gonna kind of have that Scouter effect, and what I mean by that is, if like you're gonna notice a big difference. And again, my opinion, you're going to notice a big difference between a good sorc and a bad sorc. Someone that understands positioning and not just burning cooldowns, and not just like sitting behind your line and just throwing a Q down, throwing an E down, or I'm just going off of the skills that we see here, right? and just spamming skills. Now, of course, I mean, if you're really low level of play, especially in NAEU, where where a lot of people are going to be very new, of course, you're going to have a certain level of success doing that even then, because that's just all video games, right? If you sit in the back line and nobody knows what they're doing, you just play skills down, you're gonna have some success. But like you said, as you go up, it's gonna become more difficult. So like I feel like as you start climbing as on a sorc, it's gonna kind of feel like Scouter to me, in the sense that number one, if you're going to perform much better for you and your team if you can control FOV better, if you can position better, if you're not overextending, and on top of that, not only that, but also you got to be good at controlling your character with Scouter. And it's like controlling your character on sorc is nowhere near as difficult as Scouter. However, if you don't know how you're playing your class on sorc and you're not very good with it, it's a very punishing class. Like if you're not landing your skills and you don't have meter to dash and you're burning your spacebar on nothing, you're already a squishy class to begin with. And especially even in the lower ratings, a lot of people don't peel for you. Like you don't, like to this day, I could probably count on one hand how many times I've been peeled for playing support. You know what I mean? Not that sorc is a support class, but you know, you're just not going to get, when you get caught in the lower levels of play, you're not going to get peeled for. So if you're a very good sorc playing in the lower levels of play, I think that carry potential is there, which starts to fall off the higher you go. If you're a bad if you're a bad player, even at the lower levels, I think it's going to be a very bad class to play, like an inting class, kind of like how Gunslinger is, right? Because like Gunslinger is like it's like if you're a bad Gunslinger and you can't control, they're like one of the easiest classes to shut down if the person playing that class just doesn't know what he's doing, because they're so squishy, you catch them easily. But then you put Gunslinger in the hands of a good player, it's just like, oh my god, like like what, this class is broken type of feel.
Yeah, it's a bit weird because Gunslinger is a very independent class which can survive
Yeah.
by herself. Sorceress can't. But on the other hand, Gunslinger is a bit of a hybrid, right? You go in for
Right.
burst a lot of the time.
Right,
So I think
right.
why I think Sorc would actually do okay in lower levels because even though people aren't peeling for you, the enemy team is also not going for you because they kind of forget you
Right,
exist.
right.
They're too focused on, oh, somebody's rushing me down. I gotta chase this person. I gotta rush them
Right.
down. So you kind of get away with that. And that's why I think like when you get to the intermediate level is where she starts suffering because people then realize, wait, can't I just go on the sorceress? Isn't that the win condition? And then they do that. I think she's really going to struggle in Russia actually because when you have a situation where you are like a high-ranking sorc and you're fighting another against high-ranking player, when you have like diamond double bronze versus diamond double bronze, for example, your double bronze is not going to be peeling for you. But the enemy diamond is going to be going on you, right? They're going to be focusing you down.
Right.
I think that's when the situation is going to be very difficult. But
Right.
I don't think that in NAU we're going to be getting that because we're going to have so many more players in NAU.
Yes.
I think the matchmaking is going to be a lot more accurate. So I think that's going to contribute to help
Right.
Sorc kind of establish herself.
To
And
kind
I
of
also just quickly want to go on.
I was just gonna say really quickly, not to interrupt you, to kind of explain that point, elaborate it on a little bit. What Lin is referring to is in Russia, the population is obviously a little bit smaller, and the PvP population even smaller. So what happens in a lot of these rated games is that sometimes you'll match where you have literally a grandmaster, bronze, silver or something, just like even a grandmaster and then double bronze, or you know, 2 diamonds and a bronze versus 1 grandmaster, just because there aren't that many people playing and the game is trying to match the MMR as close as possible. And when you just don't have enough people playing, that's what's going to happen. Versus in NAEU, Lin is saying and I agree with him, because there's just going to be a lot of people playing, especially in the beginning, that problem just won't really be there.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. You go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say one last thing. We were talking about how controlling scouter is a lot more difficult than controlling sorcerers, and I agree. But then we don't want to fall trap to the thing where you think that the skill level for sorcerers is controlling the character, because like I said, mechanically he's so simple to play.
Right.
Like there's only so much you can do, right? You press your X to move, you press your space and use your skills. Like she's not a hard character to play mechanically. What you want to be doing is you really have to play like very strategic. You have to position yourself like where will you be? So say that you're sticking with your team the whole game, right? Suddenly you get rushed down and now you use your X to get away. Where have you put yourself now? You just threw yourself to the middle of your map away from your team. Now the enemy team can change focus and go on you. So it may be better in that situation to not stay with your team and stay far away. And as soon as somebody decides to go on you, you can use your teleport to then rejoin with your team.
Right.
And then stay with your team while you build gauge back up and then go out and separate from your team to then get catches from off screen, for example. So they're like these little decisions that you kind of have to make on the fly about where do you want to position yourself? Should I be with my team here? Should I not be with my team? Should I be going forward? Should I be playing backline? Should I sacrifice some of my FOV to actually go around the enemy and get them from behind? So that is what you have to be thinking of as Sorc the whole time. It's less so, okay, how do, I'm going to be using this dash in this situation, and then I'm going to be using that dash, and I'm going to be catching them here. I'm going to be microing my drone to use this skill in this position. It's not that. It's not microing. It's literally macro. It's
at the game or the class to begin with.
Yeah, if you have no gauge, you're free kill, right?
Yeah.
It's that's the thing. So
Yeah.
if you're not managing your gauge, you're not managing your cooldowns correctly, then well, you're pretty much a free kill.
I think even the numbers are going to be consistent with Zerker, not like DPS numbers, damage numbers, but like I think the damage performance. Like for example, if you're playing against bad players or low elo on Zerker, and you have a feel for the class, but you know you're not the best at positioning, but you have a feel for the class, and you're playing against non-rated people that aren't good, you could dish out deeps. But then you could dish out deeps. But the moment you start playing with better players, you can go like fucking 200k damage just because you're getting counter. You can't land those skills because people are countering them. I feel like Sorc is kind of like that as well, where it's like pub stomp. If you have a general feel for the class early on, like you can really pub stomp. I mean, like just placing this shit right here, like that's not difficult to do, and you will land those against people that aren't as good. But when you when you're playing against better players and you're burning your space and you're not utilizing your X skill, your blank, it can be very punishing as well. That's kind of how I feel. So my question to you would be, as far as the NAEU tier list goes, like if we were going to do a tier list, where would you put them solo queue?
Honestly, I think that's really difficult to say because we're gonna have new players and we're gonna have veteran players, right? Right. And
it's gonna be a mix.
It's it's gonna. So I think she's gonna be like. I think most people place her at A in general.
Right.
Like for KR and Russia, and that's what I would do for her too for NAU, because she would be strong early, then falls off, and then can be strong again at a high rank. So I guess usually I feel that she's honestly relatively in a good spot balance wise, aside from the suspect hard CC pod on Q. I think she's all right actually at different levels of play. It's just that the way that you play her is different than how you play other classes. A lot of classes you're thinking about when do I go in, when do I punish, when do I use a skill, whereas the sorceress is more where am I at any given point in time. And I think she's going to be performing well. I don't think it's going to be like an S tier pub stomper type class, right? I think a artillerist, for example, is a class that I think would be very high rated in NAEU, simply because it pub stomps like new players more easily than any other class. Very much so, yeah. But then it falls off massively at a higher level. Whereas Sorc, I think she can remain relatively consistent with some peaks and troughs here and there. So I think I'd say I put her in A. I put her in a solid A. I think she's fine.
Okay, A tier. I like that. I would have to agree with that. I guess we're not going to disagree in this one. But I like that. To be honest, yeah, I would probably put them in an A tier as well. Do you have any other... So what are your... Any other opinions or thoughts that you have on this class? Because I know we've pretty much gone over everything, I feel like, right?
Yeah, we've gone over pretty much all there is. Yeah, I just say, the biggest opinion that I have is you play the class a little bit differently than how you play others. It's a little bit difficult to translate experience from, say, I'm playing on... I don't know, Infighter, and then I'm gonna go to Sorceress. She plays very, very differently because I think there are only two classes that you can really say are like pure ranged in the game. Yeah. That would be Summoner and Sorceress. Even classes like Hawkeye or Sharpshooter, you still use Move and Cut into Bladestorm to go in, right? You still go into the mid range to get that Claymore trap. You still, while you can do a lot at range, you still do a lot of stuff at mid range. And that's how most of the classes play, is always like a mid-melee or mid-range. Sorceress is one of the few that is a pure range class, right? You're always at range unless you're getting rushed down. And the very, very occasional situation where you're going to go in to like windblast somebody to save your team. Otherwise, she's just always backline. And trying to wrap your brain around how that works in the macro of the game is something that is, I don't necessarily say more or less difficult, but it's different. It's divergent from how you do other classes. So it is a bit of a unique experience playing Sorc, and I guess that's why I like her so much, and why I love playing the class. But it is a bit different, especially coming from playing lots of other classes in the Russian client, and coming into Sorceress, it has been a learning experience. Right.
Yeah. So you are planning on maining this class, right? Sorc main coming in. Can you tell us why? As generic, as broad, like that's a very broad question. But I'm going to leave it that way. I'm going to let you answer it however you want. Why? Why are you planning on maining Sorc?
Straight up aesthetics. I'm a simple man. It looks good. I like to play it.
Look, Striker looks great for me, but fuck that class.
I mean, it's real. Like, it's for example, it's like I have this thing with Infiler, which is Scrapper, right?
Yeah.
And the way that I say is like, I love to play her, but she sucks to play, right? Love to play, sucks to play. And it's like the thing, you know, a character can be really fun to play and not perform as well.
Right.
And you know, that's unfortunate, but that doesn't take away from the character being fun to play. And I find Sorceress is really interesting. Her spell effects are amazing, right? You see that Inferno come out, you know, you have the little magic circle that appears underneath her feet as she starts casting. And, you know, you have the whole animation, like Elemental Reactor, her voice gets like a filter on it once you pop it out. The effects and the aesthetics of the class are amazing. They're so beautiful. They're very, very well done. Smilegate outdid themselves when making this class. I tend to play mages in video games.
Okay.
I've been asking
You're
for like
mage
a proper
guy.
mage.
Yeah.
I'm a mage guy, damn
You're
right.
a fucking mage guy.
I'm the mages, I'm one of the mages. So I've been asking for a mage class ever since the dawn of time, and we finally got one, because Summoner isn't really a mage. She is, well, Summoner. And Bards is, you know, a very strictly support and is, you know, a musical minstrel type class. And Arcana plays more like an assassin than a mage, if I'm going to be honest. Definitely not the traditional mage archetype. And Sorceress finally is one. So I just like playing Sorc because she matches with my aesthetics and the things that I personally like playing in classes. And it just so happened that she's also super fun to play. Like I said, this ranged only playstyle, right? As somebody who tends to play ranged in other games, you don't have to make that compromise between I have to be mid-range sometimes.
Right.
If you're in mid-range, there's probably something wrong, right? You get to play Sorceress as a pure backline character.
Right.
And I very much like that. It's a true ranged that doesn't need you to control stupid pets or just have all of your damage come from Phoenix, right? Because
not a fucking
Summoner, I have a love-hate with
Summoner.
Summoner.
yeah. Well, listen, Lin, I appreciate you for coming in and doing this. I'm really glad that I got to talk to you. There's not a lot of people that are very experienced with this class. To be fair to everyone out there, though, look, not even Lin has a lot of experience on this class. When we say a lot, it means like years, right? Because this game's been out for a year. I mean, like we talked about before, Typhoon, the Korean guys, the Grandmaster guys, OpenGL. None of these guys have played this class for like 6-7 months, right? Because it just hasn't been out that much. However, we can still speculate, we can still kind of read the data, we can kind of still do as much as we can to try and keep up with this class. There's not a lot of information out there, so I wanted to try and get some good objective information for Sorceress specifically for you guys. And again, thank you so much, Lin, for coming and sharing your thoughts. Unfortunately, I think we see eye to eye a little bit too much with this one. But maybe we can get some, we need to build some beef or something, man. I keep getting, you know, I don't know. But Lin, I appreciate you making the time here. Can you tell us what you're doing? Because you stream as well and you have a YouTube channel as well. Can you tell us your stream schedule or whatever?
Yeah, sure. So I tend to just make guides on YouTube every now and then. I try to upload like every 1 or 2 weeks. Been a little bit dead, but now that, you know, Christmas is coming, annual leave is coming, I'm gonna have some time to really pump those out. For stream, I am UK based, so I tend to stream around UK time. On weekdays, this tends to be after 6 p.m. GMT, so around after 6 or 7 p.m. GMT. And I try to stream at least once every other day, and that's kind of the schedule that I try to follow. I'm not particularly strict with my schedule, sadly. I should be, but that's kind of the gist of it. Usually, you know, after 6 or 7 p.m. GMT, every other day. That's where you probably find me.
Right. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you for joining me as always. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to continue to do this on a week-to-week basis until launch. As for this one, this is a Sorc specific video. And if you guys enjoyed this format, please let me know in the comment section below. Originally, and I told this to my chat and Lin earlier, but I kind of wanted this to be a little bit more focused and shorter, but that didn't really happen. But I feel like it was, I don't know, structured just enough. And I know this is going to run out to an hour and a half right now. I don't know how long it's going to be after I edit it, but if you guys preferred this, if you guys enjoyed this, let me know. And if you guys also have a preference, maybe if you guys prefer this to be much shorter, where we really just go through almost like in a bullet point form. If you guys prefer that format, please let me know so that I can kind of structure my content that's more visually pleasing for you guys, and I will take that into consideration for our next class breakdown, PvP class breakdown. I do plan on doing this for every single class, and Lin, thank you very much, is going to be joining me for each one, and we're going to be talking about each class in detail. We're going to be going over the meta builds, the play styles, pros and cons for everything, so that you guys have a better idea on what each class is going to be like when the game comes out for NAEU. And of course, we will have some special guests depending on the classes that we are going over. But as far as this one goes and SORC goes, thank you very much, Lin. Lin and I will see you guys in the next video.